In this video, we're going to learn how to create a function. Now, we could create our own function anywhere here in Form 1, in Calculations. This module here is called Calculations. I'm just going to choose to do it inside Calculations. Now, first we got to decide whether we want it public or private. I want this function to be available to any of my forms and any of my modules. So I'm going to make this public instead of private. Next, I got to tell the computer it's going to be a function. That means it's going to return something. A subroutine does not return something. A function does return something. Okay, let's give it a name. And we always want to have a name that kind of tells the other programmers what it does. So I'm going to call the name true or false. And then I always have to have parentheses at the end. Now, if I'm not passing it any variables, I don't have to put anything in here. However, I want to pass it two variables. The first variable is I want to pass an integer. So I'm going to call it num2 as integer. And the second one, I want it to be word1 as string. Now, I have to pass this function two things because it's expecting two things. And my first thing has to be an integer. My second thing has to be a string. And whatever integer I pass it first will go into the variable num2. And whatever string I pass it, which will be my second piece of data, will go into the variable word1. Final thing I have to do is I have to tell it what type of data it's returning. And I want it to return a true or a false, so that's going to be a Boolean type of data. It could return an integer, it could return a string, but in this case I want it to return a Boolean. This is another difference between functions and subroutines. You don't have to tell a subroutine what it's going to return because a subroutine doesn't return anything. A function, however, does return something, so you have to tell the computer what is the data type it's going to return. Okay, first thing I want it to do is I want to call the message box object, and then I want to call the show subroutine, and I'm going to pass it the variable word1. So it's going to show whatever string is inside word1. Next, I want to use an if. So I'm going to say if. It's very important to have parentheses. Whenever we use an if, we need at least one set of parentheses. Our Boolean expression always has to go inside parentheses. I'm going to say if num2 is greater than 10. I'm going to hit enter. I'm going to say return true. And I'm going to say else return false. We always have to make sure we have a return statement in a function, because functions must return something, and they always must return something under any condition. So we couldn't just have if num2 is greater than 2 return true, because then it wouldn't be returning something if num2 wasn't greater than 2. By putting an else there, we make sure it returns something even if this is false. Okay, let's build this, and it builds okay. Now, this doesn't change anything that happens in our program, because even though we've created this new function, we haven't called it, so this function never runs. We will learn in the next video how to apply this function.